Welcome to the Nation of History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. Soldiers of the 7th Cavalry Regiment set up camp at Pine Ridge, South Dakota on January 19, 1891. The vast spread of white tents across the dry plain records the military presence soon after the events at Wounded Knee, showing control and surveillance on indigenous reservations. Cowboys brand calves in an open corral in 1888. The work involves a heated branding iron and holding the animal on the ground, a common practice for identifying herds on large ranches. This routine defines cattle culture and fieldwork in the American West. Rescue mine workers pose at the entrance of an excavation in Warren, Idaho County, showing the harsh conditions of 19th century mining. The group uses rail carts, wooden barrels, and rough log supports to extract ore, creating a scene of manual industrial effort in mountain terrain. During the harsh Colorado winter between 1898 and 1905, piled-up snow almost completely covered the miners' homes in the area. Only the wooden roof and chimneys stayed visible, showing the hard reality faced by workers searching for precious metals in the mountains. Gold miners in Alaska work a sluice box and a pan around 1898, showing the hands-on methods of the gold rush. The group labors among gravel piles and wooden frames to separate precious metal, facing extreme conditions while chasing fortune in the frozen north. On the bank of a river in the Yukon Territory around 1897, two men repair a boat after a leak. The overturned craft shows how fragile transportation could be during the gold rush, while stacks of supplies wait for the journey to resume on icy waters. Workers take a meal break around a supply wagon during a cattle roundup in Texas around 1900. The vehicle served as a mobile kitchen and logistics hub on the plains, keeping cowboys supplied as they traveled long distances across American ground. A rough fisherman's cabin sits on the shore of Grand Lake, Colorado, surrounded by dense evergreen forest in 1874. The record highlights how pioneer building blended with preserved mountain nature, serving as a practical shelter in rugged terrain and cold waters. Two miners weigh gold nuggets and gold dust in a rough cabin near Nome, Alaska, around 1900. Using a precision scale was vital to set the value of finds during the gold rush, turning small camps into centers of intense business and economic activity. Farm workers operate a pulley system to stack alfalfa hay at Stockdale Ranch in mid-1888. The California scene shows a technical shift in American farming, where animal power and simple lifting devices were essential for handling large harvest loads in the field. Workers and draft animals operate in an open-pit coal mine in Wilburton, in what was then Indian Territory, around 1898. The documentary record shows manual labor and ore loading logistics, highlighting growing industrial activity in the American Southwest. Chinese merchants of Hop Wo Chung and Company pose in front of their general store in Arizona Territory in 1894. The record highlights traditional lanterns and signs in Asian characters, showing the strong presence and entrepreneurship of the Asian community in the American Southwest. The engineering crew of the Deadwood Central Railroad uses theodolites and measuring rods on a rocky slope in 1888. The group of men in period hats works with precision instruments to lay out rail routes in South Dakota. This technical effort was key for logistical integration and industrial progress. A rough log cabin with a sod roof in the Yukon Flats appears surrounded by a team of sled dogs in 1901. The record details architecture adapted to extreme climate and the importance of animals for transportation and survival in remote parts of Alaska and Canada. A logging crew runs a rough railroad around 1902 using the strength of 8 horses to pull a massive log along wooden rails. The record shows the huge scale of extractive industry, where animal power was combined with wagon systems for transport. The massive wooden frame mounted on the front of the locomotive worked like a colossal plow to clear the Central Pacific Railroad tracks. Between 1865 and 1869, workers faced harsh Sierra Nevada winters in California to keep railroad expansion moving. Hundreds of white tents make up a Chinese workers' camp set at the end of the expanding tracks. Between 1866 and 1869, these immigrants were vital to building the Central Pacific Railroad, living in rough conditions as the line pushed across the dry lands of the American West. A Cheyenne man is portrayed in a striking bust, wearing a metal crucifix on his chest and holding a ceremonial axe. The record details a blend of cultural and spiritual elements, showing the person's dignity through traditional clothing and symbolic items. A Chinese camp at Brown Station, Nevada, was documented between 1865 and 1869. The scene details makeshift dwellings and household items beside the tracks, showing the essential workforce behind building the Transcontinental Railroad. The Wild West Hotel in Perry appears as an improvised camp of tents and wooden structures in Oklahoma Territory on September 16, 1893. The record shows settlers and wagons in the dust, capturing the rough conditions and excitement of the famous land run in the central United States. 3 uniformed women and 1 uniformed man sit on horses in front of a wooden building at Fort Verde, Arizona. The group captured between 1884 and 1887 reflects military and social organization at outposts in the American Southwest. Formal riding clothes point to the strict discipline of frontier life. A long train and several covered wagons leave north of Orlando toward Perry on September 16, 1893. The record in Oklahoma Territory documents mass migration and the simultaneous use of different transportation technologies as new frontiers open for settlement. The first water infrastructure work in Perry, Oklahoma Territory was recorded on October 10, 1893. The scene details the use of animal power and large tanks mounted on wagons, showing the technical effort to secure water supply amid rapid urban growth. Stumphorn and his Cheyenne relatives show the use of a horse-pulled travois, an essential method for moving loads and people on the Great Plains. The record details the wooden frame attached to the animal, highlighting logistical ingenuity and native mobility. A large team of owners and workers from the Philmont mine poses in front of a massive gravel pile in Siskiyou County, California. The record from 1891 includes numbered men, women, and children for identification, revealing family makeup and social organization tied to regional gold mining. A crowd gathers at the Standing Rock Agency in North Dakota around 1885 for the distribution of government rations and supplies. John Grable's record exposes forced economic dependence and the administrative routine on reservations, revealing the complex logistics of survival on the frontier. A group of Paiute people wearing Western-style clothing is photographed between 1860 and 1870. The image reveals forced cultural assimilation and social changes imposed on Native peoples during American territorial expansion. This cultural contact deeply shaped survival dynamics in the Great Basin. Members of the Cheyenne Indian Police pose in uniform around 1880, reflecting the complex cultural transition on the Great Plains. Equipped with duty gear and wide brim hats, these men handled internal order on reservations under an organization that blended tradition and federal rules. The faculty of the Albuquerque Indian School in New Mexico gathered for this official portrait in 1883. The composition shows formal dress and native textiles in the background, highlighting the institutional setting and education policies of the period. A cowboy poses for a formal portrait in front of a painted backdrop at J. Buckle Ranch, wearing a neckerchief and a utility belt. The photograph highlights the presence and importance of black workers in western cattle ranching, carrying out vital roles on large ranches in the late 19th century. A man carefully paints inscriptions on wooden crosses at the Little Bighorn Historic Site in 1879. The record details the marking of memorial posts in the area linked to Custer, preserving remembrance amid Montana's wide landscape. Workers carry out cleaning day at the Deadwood Terra Gold Stamp Mill in Terraville in 1888. The record in Dakota Territory details maintenance of massive machines and the industrial organization needed to process precious ore. In a mountain region, the mining settlement of Gold Hill, Nevada, was captured between 1867 and 1868. The panoramic view reveals imposing mining structures and roughhousing that defined the period's extractive economy. A long caravan of ore-loaded wagons crosses a dusty road in Pinal County around 1897. Dozens of mules pull the heavy vehicles across the arid Arizona territory, showing the complex logistics of mineral transport in the American Southwest. A worker runs placer mining equipment in Columbia, Tuolumne County, as published in 1866. The California record details sluices and screens used to extract gold, showing the hands-on techniques that drove the economy and migration during the gold rush. Photographer William Henry Jackson reaches the summit of Mount Washburn in 1871, hauling heavy equipment on pack animals to capture the vast American West. His expeditions were vital to the creation of national parks, documenting unexplored landscapes with pioneering techniques. A Black Hills and Fort Pierre Railroad steam locomotive winds through Elk Canyon, South Dakota in 1890. John Grabble's record details the train hauling heavy loads along rocky slopes, reinforcing the vital role of rail transport in regional mining. A Burlington and Missouri River Railroad locomotive is parked near Hot Springs, South Dakota in 1891. Passengers in formal clothing pose along the tracks and on the cars, highlighting railroad expansion across rocky terrain. Two passenger stagecoaches known as the Deadwood Coach cross a makeshift wooden bridge in 1889. The photo captures the coaches at full capacity and the complexity of overland routes in South Dakota, showing public transport that linked mining settlements. In Denver, Colorado, the Holiday Overland Mail and Express Company office operated between 1865 and 1870. In front of the imposing brick building, a stagecoach hitched to several horses waits to begin carrying mail and passengers along the dangerous routes of the West. On the banks of the Green River, the expedition led by John Wesley Powell set up its first camp in Wyoming Territory. The record from 1871 details pioneer logistics, showing photographic equipment and the daily routine of explorers on American ground. The crew of the vessel Picture poses together at Diamond Creek on the Colorado River in 1871. The mixed group reflects the teamwork needed to travel challenging western waters, combining technical and practical know-how in one of America's driest and most remote regions. An expedition boat with raised sails moves on the Truckee River in western Nevada around 1867. The record details the use of boats for mapping and scientific exploration, highlighting the logistics needed to cross inland river basins. Dodge City in the mid-1880s represented the peak of westward expansion in America. Horses pulling vehicles along dirt roads were common in front of wooden homes with white fences. This daily life in Kansas shows the urban transition that continued into the early 20th century. Main Street in Wilton appears as a portrait of urban expansion in North Dakota during the 1890s. Small wooden businesses and general stores line the dirt road, serving as essential trade centers for settlers and farmers seeking prosperity and stability. A pioneer family poses in front of a wooden home at Lucas Ranch in Butte Meadows, California. The record from around 1890 shows adults and children at rest, highlighting a rough build of vertical boards and a wood shingle roof amid dense forest growth. Gold miners pose with their pack animals in front of a rough log cabin in Colorado around 1898. The mountain setting and the presence of burros show the tough logistics of mineral work in the late 19th century. Camps like this were the core of the region's extractive economy. George Carnac poses in front of his wooden cabin in the Yukon Territory around 1897. The miner was part of the busy gold rush in northwestern Canada, facing the harsh climate while seeking fortune during the peak of mineral exploration on that frontier. A United States postal inspector makes an inspection trip through Alaska on his mule in 1898. The record details an icy setting with tents and transport gear, revealing the logistical challenges of keeping communication going in remote regions at the time. A laundress poses in front of her canvas tent in Alaska around 1902 during the height of the Yukon Gold Rush. The record highlights the essential role of women in the service backbone of mining camps, doing vital work for survival in extreme geography. At Fort Verde, Arizona, around 1887, a mule-drawn wagon carries a large wooden barrel for water supply. The record highlights the basic logistics needed to survive at isolated military posts, where hauling vital resources depended on animal power. Workers and riders gather at Buena Vista Farm in Kern County, California, while handling large hay bales. The record made between 1883 and 1888 shows the scale of farm work and the dependence on animal power before full mechanization of American farms. Farm workers at Irvine Ranch in California operate large agricultural machinery during the 1891 harvest. The use of wooden conveyors and animal power shows growing mechanization in the countryside, turning broad stretches of land into productive engines that boosted the Western economy. Workers at the Trade Dollar Mine pose for a group portrait on the dry slopes of Owyhee County, Idaho. Precious metal mining drove the region's economic growth in the late 19th century, building complex infrastructure in remote and challenging terrain. Blue gravel mine workers pose in front of ore piles south of Eureka, California, around 1890. The group displays work tools under a wooden frame, showing the hard physical labor needed to pull wealth from American ground during the peak of Western gold expansion. Settlers claim land in Guthrie in what was then Indian Territory around 1889. The outdoor domestic scene with furniture and barrels under makeshift covers portrays the rushed settlement period and living conditions during the Oklahoma Land Run. Chief Iron Bear was photographed at Fort Berthold, North Dakota, around 1866, wearing traditional clothing and items that symbolize his leadership and culture. The image preserves the dignity of indigenous nations during a time of major territorial change and cultural conflict on the frontier. A Sioux man identified as Sunflower is photographed in a record from 1899. The image captures meaningful cultural elements and traditional adornments, preserving indigenous identity on the North American Great Plains during a period of deep social and territorial change. Sioux chiefs on horseback display impressive feather headdresses in 1905, the year this record was made. The image details ceremonial dress and a leadership stance on the plains, preserving cultural dignity and horse tradition in a wide open setting. A crowd fills the streets of Omaha, Nebraska to watch Indian Day Parade on August 4, 1898. The event brings together representatives of several indigenous nations on horseback and in ceremonial clothing, creating an important record of visibility and cultural preservation in an urbanizing setting. Navajo people are gathered near Old Fort Defiance, New Mexico, in a historical record from 1873. The scene shows traditional homes and parts of local subsistence, like corn hanging to dry. These details illustrate cultural resilience and native lifeways during colonization. A large group of Navajo men gathers at Fort Defiance in Arizona Territory in 1873. The record details horses in the background and varied clothing, pointing to a climate of surveillance and the diplomatic relationships formed at military posts in the Southwest. A group of Coyotero Apache people and their agent pose together at Camp Apache in Arizona Territory in 1873. The record details coexistence between Native communities and government representatives, showing varied clothing and social organization at frontier outposts. A Kiowa family poses for a solemn portrait in Indian Territory around 1890. The image captures the patriarch holding a protective item as a sign of status, while the group shows a transition between traditional customs and outside aesthetic influence in the last decade of the 19th century. Asabebi's daughters, young women of the Comanche Nation, were photographed in a studio between 1881 and 1885. The record preserves details of traditional clothing and decorated blankets, symbolizing cultural identity during a time of intense outside pressure. Members of the Paiute people pose for a group portrait in Cedar, in what is now Utah, in 1872. Cultural elements preserved in clothing and artifacts show the resilience and adaptation of these communities amid territorial change. Chief Looking Glass of the Nez Perce Nation appears on horseback in front of a traditional tent in 1877. The image captures the leader's strong presence and the details of his ceremonial clothing, serving as a key record of cultural resistance during territorial conflicts. On horseback, Steve Hovey serves as wagon boss in a camp photographed around 1874. The image illustrates the hierarchy and transportation essential to territorial expansion, highlighting the person responsible for coordinating wagons across the wide plains. An indigenous family is photographed by John C.H. Grabble around 1888, posed in front of a traditional tent on the Central Plains. The record highlights decorated blankets and a saddled horse, elements tied to mobility and social structure during a time of intense change. Everyday life of the Shoshone people is preserved in this photograph taken between 1880 and 1910, showing their traditional teepees set up in a mountain area. The image documents indigenous culture and social organization around the turn of the century, highlighting nomadic homes and the strong presence of this Native American nation in its own homeland. A Native American man is photographed in front of a teepee in Minnesota during the 19th century, wearing medals and traditional clothing. The record highlights details of dress and typical shelter, serving as an important visual document of indigenous presence and cultural preservation in the region. A Native American woman is photographed in Minnesota during the 19th century, seated at the entrance of a teepee. The record details elaborate necklaces and patterned clothing, showing aspects of dress and home life during a period of major change across North American territory. The Reynolds and Dowling camp at Quaking Asp Hill in Utah was recorded between 1868 and 1870. The rough log cabin with a sod roof shelters the miners and their dog, revealing practical architecture and harsh survival conditions in the West. The rough setting of the newsroom in Delamar shows daily press life in Nevada in 1895. Among hand presses and posters on the wall, typesetters ran heavy machines to print local news. Hard work in this mining town kept essential information moving. Military officers and Lieutenant Colonel Baker pose in front of a wooden building at Fort Ellis in Montana Territory in 1871. The record details period clothing and the presence of a guard dog, showing daily life at outposts during westward expansion. Around 1885, Colonel Dupersal's ranch is photographed in New Mexico, United States, with cabin-style wooden buildings and a lookout tower beside them. Horses and a wagon stand in front of the main house, pointing to transportation and ranch work. The photo shows life on isolated properties in the Old West. Major Pease's ranch in the Yellowstone region of Montana was documented in 1872. The image shows a rough cabin with a sod roof and settlers with a domestic animal, illustrating daily life and subsistence in frontier areas. James Mark Kellerman poses for a portrait in 1885 wearing the practical outfit of a Kansas cowboy. Employed at Smoky Hills Ranch, he wears reinforced leather pants, a waist rig with working gear, and a wide brim hat, all essential for handling cattle on the plains of Gove County. The sign for the Sweetwater Saloon in Sweetwater, Texas, shows how frontier businesses could be multifunctional by offering drinks and women's goods under the same roof. A group of men poses in front of the wooden storefront, where the ad lists a price of 5 cents, reflecting the economy and social customs of small Texas communities. Arizona Mary drives a long team of oxen along a winding dirt road in an arid region around 1890. The image captures heavy freight transport across Arizona Territory, highlighting basic logistics and the role of women in guiding these vital caravans that supplied remote communities in the Southwest. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, please use the Super Thanks tool below. Your contribution helps us keep bringing you amazing historical content. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next video.